The arena had been transformed for the formal honor combat galactic dignitaries, filled the upper galleries in their ceremonial robes and armor. Representatives from 100 worlds who had traveled to witness what everyone assumed would be the final humiliation of the human, who had dared to challenge Drakvari supremacy, and their presence gave the event a weight that the trainee duel had lacked. Holocameras floated above the arena floor, broadcasting the event to billions of viewers across the galaxy who had tuned in to watch the spectacle. Instructor Morath stood at the edge of the arena with the other Academy officials, his expression grim as he prepared to announce the combatants. "This is a formal honor combat sanctioned by the Galactic Martial Academy," he declared, between Drakon Thornscale, champion of the Drakvari 3rd Legion, and Unipark, trainee of Earth. The main gates opened and Drakon entered the arena. He was a mountain of scale and muscle, his body covered in scars that told the story of a lifetime spent in combat. And he moved with the controlled precision of a predator who had long ago learned that wasted motion was wasted energy. He did not play to the crowd like his sister had. He simply walked to the center of the arena and waited with cold golden eyes fixed on the gate where his opponent would emerge. Yuna entered through the smaller gate wearing the same simple training clothes she had worn. Against Vrekath, crowd murmured at the sight of her, so small and fragile compared to the warrior she faced, and many of them wondered if this would even be a fight at all, or simply an execution. She walked to the center of the arena and stopped 10 feet from Drakon. "You defeated my sister," Drakon said in a voice like grinding stone. "But she was young and arrogant, and she underestimated you. And I will not make the same mistake. I know." Yuna Sadrakon tilted his massive head. "You are not afraid," he observed. "I am terrified," Yuna replied honestly. "But fear does not control me." Something flickered in Drakarn's eyes. Something that might have been respect. "Good," he said. "I would not want to kill a coward." Morath raised his arm and then brought it down. "Begin." Unlike Vreka, Drakon did not charge. He moved forward with careful, deliberate steps, his claws raised in a defensive position, his eyes tracking Yuna's every movement with the focus of a predator who had hunted far more dangerous prey than a single human. Yuna circled slowly, looking for an opening. She found none. Drakon tested her with a probing strike that she deflected easily, but he was already flowing into a follow-up attack that caught her off guard and sent her stumbling backward with a new cut opening across her shoulder. First blood. The crowd roared. Yuna reset her stance and forced herself to breathe through the pain as warm blood ran down her arm and dripped onto the arena floor. Drakon watched her with cold calculation. "You rely on your opponent making mistakes," he said. "But I do not make mistakes." He attacked again. A precise combination of strikes and grabs that left Yuna no room to redirect or evade, as she took more damage. Cuts opening on her arms and ribs as she desperately tried to survive the onslaught. The crowd began to chant, "Drakon! Drakon! Drakon!" Yuna fell back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body screaming with pain from a dozen wounds that bled freely as she tried to find some way to turn the tide. She could see Jinseo in the crowd, his face pale with fear. She could see Instructor Morath with his 4 eyes closed as if he could not bear to watch, and she could see Vreka standing alone in one of the upper galleries, her golden eyes fixed on Yuna with an expression that held something unexpected. Opena stopped retreating. She planted her feet and let her breathing slow and felt something shift inside her. The same thing she had felt as a child when the bullies had cornered her one too many times, and she had finally decided that she would rather die fighting than live as a victim. Drakon saw the change in her stance and paused. "What is this?" he asked. "Something my grandmother taught me," Yuna said, "about what humans do when we have nothing left to lose." She attacked not with redirection or deflection, but with precise targeted Strikes aimed at nerve clusters and pressure points that she had spent the last week studying obsessively, mapping the Drakvari anatomy and finding the weak spots that even their armored scales could not fully protect. Draken blocked the first strike easily, and the second, but the third found its target. A bundle of nerves beneath his arm that sent a shock of pain through his entire left side. Grunted and Saprisi Yuna pressed her advantage, flowing around his counterattacks and landing strike after strike on the sensitive points she had identified, each one causing his movements to become slightly slower and his coordination slightly worse. "What are you doing?" Draken demanded. "Humans call it dim mak," Yuna replied through gritted teeth. "The death touch, and it works on every species we have ever encountered." Draken roared and attacked with renewed fury, but his body was betraying him now, his strikes coming a fraction slower than they should, and his movements lacking the precision that had defined them. Earlier, Yuna took more damage in the exchange. A claw strike opened her leg and nearly brought her down, but she kept fighting. She kept landing her nerve strikes, and slowly, impossibly, the greatest warrior of the Drakari 3rd Legion began to falter. "Yield," Yuna gasped. "Barely able to stand." "Never," Draken snarled. But his voice lacked conviction. He gathered himself for one final attack, a killing blow that would end this nightmare once and for all. And he launched himself at Yuna with every ounce of strength his damaged body could produce. Yuna did not try to redirect. She stepped inside his guard and drove her elbow into his throat with every bit of force she could generate. And as he choked and stumbled, she swept his legs out from under him and brought him crashing to the arena floor. She stood over him, swaying on her feet, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Barely conscious, Draken lay on his back, gasping for breath and staring up at her with something that looked like wonder. "What are you?" he whispered. Yuna reached down and offered him her hand. "Human," she said. He looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. The arena exploded with sound as Yuna helped Draken to his feet. And this time, the cheers were not mocking but thunderous with acknowledgement of what they had just witnessed. A human had defeated the champion of the Drakvari, not through trickery or luck, but through skill and determination, and a refusal to surrender that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about the soft pink creatures from Earth. 3 weeks later, Yuna stood in the academy training hall watching a new batch of trainees arrive. She had risen in the rankings, not to the top, but high enough that no one questioned her right to be there anymore. And Vreka had become her training partner. Their former enmity transformed into something that resembled friendship as the Drakvari struggled to understand the techniques that had defeated. Both her and her brother Jinseo stood beside her, with a datapad in his hands. "There is another human in this group," he said. A young man from somewhere called Seoul. Yuna spotted him immediately. A frightened-looking young man who clutched his bag like a shield, while the predator species around him stared and whispered. She remembered what that felt like. She walked toward him and watched his eyes widen as he recognized her from the broadcast that had made her famous across the galaxy. "Welcome to the academy," she said with a warm smile. "Stick with me, and I will show you how we survive." His fear began to fade as he realized he was not alone, and somewhere in the viewing galleries above them, Instructor Morath watched with all 4 of his eyes and allowed himself a rare smile. The humans had come to stay, and the galaxy would never be the same. The days following the duel were unlike anything the Academy had experienced in its 300-year history. Arguments erupted in every corridor and training hall as trainees debated what they had witnessed, with some insisting that Yuna must have cheated, using some unknown human technology, while others reluctantly admitted that they had simply underestimated what humans were capable of. Instructor Morath officially declared the duel valid during an assembly, stating that Yuna had defeated Vreka according to the Academy's own rules and that the result would stand. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Vreka Thornscale disappeared from training sessions entirely, retreating to her quarters in shame that cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. Because among the Drekvari, losing to a lesser species was not simply a personal failure, but a stain on family honor that would follow her for the rest of her life. Yuna, meanwhile, found herself the center of unwanted attention. Wherever she went, some trainees approached her with open hostility, bumping into her in corridors and muttering threats under their breath, while others kept their distance and watched her with wary eyes as if she might attack them at any moment. But not everyone reacted with fear or anger. Jinseo found her in the medical bay where she was treating the cuts and bruises from the duel, and he sat down beside her with an expression of pure fascination on his aquatic features. "I watched the entire fight from the observation deck," he said, "and I have been trying to understand what I saw ever since." Yuna applied the healing salve he had given her to a cut on her arm. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," Jinseo replied. "But mostly I want to know how you did it. Because from what I could see, you never once tried to match her strength with your own." Yuna smiled slightly. "That is exactly right," she said. "I was never going to win a contest of raw power against a Drekvari. So I did not try, and instead I used her power against her. But how?" Jinseo pressed. "Physics," Yuna said. "Every attack has momentum. And if you understand how that momentum works, you can redirect it. And you can make your opponent defeat themselves using their own strength." Jinseo considered this for a long moment. "Your species developed this because you are not natural predators," he said slowly. "You do not have claws or fangs or venom, so you had to find other ways to survive." "Exactly," Yuna said. "Humans learned long ago that being small and weak compared to the predators on our world did not mean we had to be victims. And we developed techniques that allow us to overcome opponents much larger and stronger than ourselves." "Remarkable," Jinseo said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. Over the following days, Jinseo became something like a friend, meeting Yuna for meals and training sessions and asking endless questions about human combat philosophy that she did her best to answer. Other trainees began to approach her as well, mostly members of species that were traditionally looked down upon by the apex predators who dominated the academy hierarchy, and they treated her with a respect that had nothing to do with fear. Then, 1 week after the duel, everything changed again as shuttle arrived at Station Korath 7 carrying a delegation from the Drekvari homeworld. And the leader of that delegation was a warrior named Drakern Thornscale, Vreka's older brother. He was even larger than Vreka, standing nearly 9 feet tall with scars crisscrossing his scales that spoke of decades spent in combat. And he walked through the academy corridors with the confidence of someone who had killed more opponents than most trainees would ever face in their entire lives. The delegation demanded an audience with the academy leadership, and within hours a formal challenge had been issued. Ricardo Charnscale challenged Yuna Park to a sanctioned honor combat to restore the reputation of his family and his species instructor. Morath pulled Yuna aside after the announcement. "You do not have to accept this," he said in a low, urgent voice. "This is not a trainee seeking to prove herself. This is a decorated military champion who has fought in actual wars. And I do not believe you can defeat him. What happens if I refuse?" Yuna asked. Morath hesitated. "You would be within your rights," he said, "but it would be seen as cowardice, and everything you accomplished in the arena would be dismissed as a fluke victory against an overconfident opponent." Yuna nodded slowly. "Then I accept," she said. Morath closed all 4 of his eyes in something that looked like pain. "I was afraid you would say that," he said. "News of her Acceptance spread through the academy within minutes. And this time, the betting pools did not even bother calculating odds because everyone assumed the outcome was already decided. The night before the formal challenge was to be announced, Yuna sat alone in the observation deck watching the stars outside the station viewport and thinking about what she had gotten herself into. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Rekka Thornscale standing in the doorway. The Drakvari looked different from before, smaller somehow despite her massive frame, and the arrogance that had defined her presence was nowhere to be seen. "Can I sit?" Rekka asked quietly. Yuna gestured to the space beside her. Rekka settled onto the deck with her back against the viewport and stared at the floor for a long moment before speaking. "I need to ask you something," she said finally. "And I need you to tell me the truth." "Ask?" Yuna said. Rekka looked up and met her eyes. "Why did you let me yield?" she asked. "You could have broken my arm. You could have made me scream and beg in front of everyone. You could have humiliated me in ways that would have destroyed me completely. So why did you just let me go?" Yuna considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I did not need to," she said. "I did not come to the academy to destroy anyone. I came to prove that humans belong here. And I did not need to hurt you to do that." Rekka stared at her with something unreadable in her golden eyes. "Among my people, mercy is seen as weakness," she said. "But what you did was not weak. It was something else entirely. And I have been trying to understand it ever since. It was respect," Yuna said simply. "You challenged me fairly and fought me honorably, and when you lost, you yielded with dignity. And that deserved respect, not cruelty." Rekka was silent for a long time. "My brother will kill you," she said finally. "He is not like me. He does not fight for pride or glory. He fights to destroy, and he will not stop until you are dead." "I know," Yuna said. "Then why are you doing this?" "Rekka," demanded Yuna, turned to look at the stars outside the viewport. "Because some things are worth fighting for even if you might lose," she said. "And proving that humans belong among the predators is one of those things." Rekka rose to her feet and stood over Yuna for a moment. "I do not understand you," she said, "but I think I would like to. And if you somehow survive tomorrow, I want you to teach me how you fight." She walked away without waiting for a response. Yuna watched her go and then turned back to the stars. Tomorrow, she would face the most dangerous opponent of her life. Tomorrow she might die, but she would not hide. And she would not run. She would step into that arena and show the galaxy one more time what humans were made of. The arena was packed with bodies. Trainees filled every available space in the viewing galleries, hanging from railings and climbing over each other for a better view. And their excited chatter filled the air like the buzzing of 1,000 insects waiting for blood. Instructor Morath stood at the edge of the arena floor with several other instructors who had officially come to maintain order, but who were clearly just as eager to see what would happen as the trainees above them. The morning sun simulation had just reached full brightness when Rekka Thornscale made her entrance. She came through the main gates like a conquering hero, her scales gleaming and her claws extended to their full lethal length, and venom dripped from her fingertips to sizzle against the arena floor as she walked to the center and raised her arms to accept the thunderous cheers of the crowd. "Rekka! Rekka! Rekka!" they chanted. She basked in it, turning in a slow circle to acknowledge her admirers, her golden eyes bright with anticipation and cruelty. As she waited for her opponent to appear, a minute passed, then another. The crowd began to murmur, and Rekka's smile started to fade as she wondered if the human had finally come to her senses and fled. Then the smaller gate on the opposite side of the arena opened, and Yuna Park walked through. She wore simple training clothes, a fitted shirt and loose pants that allowed freedom of movement, and her feet were bare against the arena floor. She carried no Weapons, she wore no armor. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat and then erupted in mocking laughter that rolled through the galleries like a wave. "Look at it!" someone screamed. "The human has no protection." Another howled. "This will be over in seconds." Yuna walked to the center of the arena and stopped 10 feet from Vreka, her expression calm and her breathing steady as she looked up at the massive Drakevari who could end her life with a single well-placed strike instructor. Morath stepped forward. "This is an honor duel between Vreka, Thornscale, and Unipark," he announced in a voice that carried throughout the arena. "There are no rules, except that the duel ends when one combatant yields or is rendered unable to continue. And may fortune favor the worthy." He stepped back. The arena fell silent. Vreka flexed her claws and let out a low growl that resonated in Yuna's chest. "Any last words, human?" she asked. Yuna shifted her weight slightly and raised her hands into a relaxed guard position. "Begin when you are ready," she said. Vreka charged. She moved with terrifying speed for something so large, covering the distance between them in less than a second with her right claw raised for a devastating strike that would have taken Yuna's head clean off her shoulders. But Yuna was not there. She had already moved, stepping to the side at the exact moment Vreka committed to the attack. And as the Dritvari's momentum carried her forward, Yuna reached out and redirected the force of the strike with a subtle twist of her hands. Vreka stumbled past her and nearly fell. The crowd went silent. Vreka spun around with confusion in her eyes that quickly turned to anger. "Lucky," she snarled. "You will not be lucky twice." She attacked again, this time with a series of rapid strikes that would have overwhelmed any opponent through sheer aggression. But Yuna flowed around each attack like water around stone, never blocking directly, but always redirecting and deflecting and using Vreka's own force against her. "Stand still." Vreka roared. She lunged forward and tried to grab Yuna in a crushing embrace that would have broken bones. But Yuna ducked under her arms and seized one of them at the wrist and elbow, twisting her body and using Vreka's forward momentum to send the massive Drakevari crashing to the arena floor with a thunderous impact. The crowd gasped. Vreka lay on the ground for a moment, stunned, and then she rose with murder in her eyes. "What is this?" she demanded. "What trickery is this?" "No trickery," Yuna said quietly. "Just technique." Vreka abandoned any pretense of skill and attacked with pure savage aggression, swinging her claws in wild arcs that would have torn Yuna apart if they connected. And some of them did. A glancing strike opened a cut on Yuna's arm. Another grazed her ribs and left a line of fire across her skin. But Yuna kept moving, kept redirecting, kept making Vreka expend massive amounts of energy while she conserved her own. And slowly the Drakevari began to tire. The crowd had fallen completely silent now, watched with growing disbelief as the tiny human continued to evade and redirect and occasionally counter with precise strikes that seemed to do little damage, but that accumulated over time, targeting joints and pressure points that even Drakevari armor could not fully protect. Vreka's movements grew slower. Her breathing became labored, and still Yuna moved like a ghost, untouchable and patient and absolutely relentless. "Yield," Yuna said during a brief pause in the combat. "Never." Vreka screamed. She gathered herself for one final devastating charge, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into a strike that would end this humiliation once and for all. Yuna watched her come at the last possible moment. She stepped inside Vreka's guard and executed a perfect sacrifice throw, dropping her own weight while redirecting all of Vreka's mass and momentum in a single fluid motion that sent the Drakevari flying through the air to slam into the arena floor with an impact that shook the entire structure. Before Vreka could recover, Yuna was on her, securing an arm lock that hyperextended the Drakevari's elbow joint and threatened to dislocate it entire. Live Rekka thrashed and struggled, but she could not escape without causing herself permanent injury. Yield, Yuna whispered into her ear, or I break it. And the choice is yours. The arena held its breath. Rekka's golden eyes were wide with shock and humiliation, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. And her body trembled with rage and exhaustion as she processed the impossible reality of her situation. She had been defeated by a human, by a creature half her size, with no claws and no venom and no natural armor. I yield, Rekka said finally. Her voice barely audibly. Yuna released her immediately and stood up, stepping back to give the Drakvari space to rise. The arena remained completely silent for 3 long heartbeats. Then chaos erupted. Trainees shouted and screamed and argued with each other, some claiming that Yuna must have cheated somehow, while others demanded to know how she had done it. And the instructors moved quickly to restore order before the excitement turned to violence. Instructor Morath walked to the center of the arena and raised his arms. The duel is concluded, he announced. Yuna Park is the victor by submission. Yuna stood alone in the center of the arena, with blood dripping from her wounds and sweat running down her face. And she looked up at the stunned faces staring down at her from the galleries. She had done it. She had proven that humans could compete with apex predators, and this, she knew, was only the beginning. As she walked toward the exit, she passed Rekka, who remained on her knees with her head bowed. And for just a moment their eyes met. Yuna saw something in those golden eyes that she had not expected. Not just humiliation or rage, but questions that would need answers, but that would come later. For now, Yuna walked out of the arena with her head held high, while the galaxy began to realize that everything they thought they knew about humans might have been wrong. Word spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. By the morning after the confrontation, every single trainee on station Korath 7 knew that the human had accepted a challenge from Rekka Thornscale, and the reactions ranged from disbelief to amusement to something that might have been pity. Betting pools formed within hours. The odds against Yuna surviving without permanent injury stood at 200 to 1. And even that seemed generous to most of the trainees who had seen what Drakvari could do to their opponents in the arena. Yuna ignored all of it. She woke before dawn on the first day and made her way to the observation deck above the main training arena, where she could watch the morning sessions without being noticed. And she sat there for 3 hours, studying the way different species moved and fought. And one she paid special attention to. Vrekath Drakvari fought like a force of nature, all power and aggression and overwhelming strength. And Yuna watched her tear through training dummies and sparring partners with equal ease, while the other trainees cheered and howled with approval. But Yuna also noticed things that others might have missed. She noticed how Rekka telegraphed her strikes with a slight shift in her weight, how she always led with her right claw when attacking, how her balance suffered when she committed fully to a charge, and how her arrogance made her leave openings that a more disciplined fighter would never allow. Yuna filed away every observation and returned to her quarters to think. That afternoon, Instructor Morath found her in one of the smaller training rooms practicing movements that looked strange and fluid compared to the brutal techniques favored by the academy. He watched her for a while before speaking. I heard about your challenge, he said. Finally, Yuna paused her practice but did not turn around. I also heard that you have no intention of backing down, Morath continued, which tells me that you are either very brave or very foolish, and I cannot decide which, perhaps both. Yuna replied. Morath made a sound that might have been a laugh. Drakvari honor duels have no rules, he said, his tone growing serious. No restrictions on weapons or techniques. No mercy expected or given, and they rarely end without serious bloodshed. So I am required to ask you one final time if you understand what you are agreeing to. I understand, Una said. Then may whatever gods your species believes in watch over you, Morris said. And he left without another word. That night Una lay in her bunk and let her mind drift back to her childhood on Earth. To the small apartment in Bizen, where she had grown up with her grandmother after her parents died in an accident that she barely remembered. She had been a small child, smaller than the others her age, and the bullies had found her quickly. They had pushed her and hit her and called her names. And she had come home crying so many times that her grandmother finally sat her down and made a decision that would change her life forever. You are small, her grandmother had said in her gentle voice, and you will always be small. But being small does not mean being weak. It means being smart. It means learning to use what others have against them. And I am going to teach you how. Her grandmother had enrolled her in a martial arts school that taught judo and later Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And over the years, Una had transformed from a frightened child into something far more dangerous. The bigger they are, her grandmother always said, the harder they fall, and if you use their strength against them, they will defeat themselves. Una smiled at the memory and closed her eyes. On the second day, she returned to the observation deck and continued her study of Vreka while also watching the other species train, learning their movements and weaknesses and filing everything away for future use. During the afternoon meal, a Morvathi approached her table. He was smaller than most trainees, with sleek blue-green scales and large dark eyes that studied her with obvious curiosity. And he carried a small bag that he placed on the table between them. My name is Jinseo, he said in a soft voice, and I wanted to give you these. Una opened the bag and found medical supplies inside. Bandages and pain relievers and a healing salve that she recognized from the academy infirmary. You will need them, Jinseo said, after the duel, and I wanted you to have them because what you did took courage, even if it was also probably insane. Thank you, Una said. And she meant to Jinseo sat down across from her and studied her face. Can I ask you something? He said. Una nodded. Why did you accept? He asked. You could have ignored her, could have reported her to the instructors, could have done anything except agree to fight the most dangerous trainee in the academy. So why did you say yes? Una thought about the question for a moment. Because I did not come here to hide, she said finally. I came here to prove that humans belong. And I cannot do that by running from every challenge. Jinseo considered this and then slowly nodded. I hope you survive, he said. I think I would like to talk to you more. That night, Una was walking back to her quarters when three figures stepped out of the shadows to block her path. They were Drakvari, smaller than Vreka, but still towering over Una, and their eyes glowed with malice in the dim corridor lights. The human should forfeit, one of them said. Forfeit and apologize to Vreka for the insult of accepting her challenge. And maybe we will let you leave the station alive. Una looked at the three of them without expression. And if I do not forfeit? She asked. The lead Drakvari smiled and flexed his claws. Then we will give you a preview of what Vreka will do to you in the arena, he said. We will break enough bones to make the point without killing you. And you will crawl to Vreka tomorrow and beg for mercy. Una felt her heart rate increase slightly, but she kept her voice calm. I appreciate the warning, she said. But I will be in the arena tomorrow morning. And I am actually looking forward to it. The Drakvari exchanged confused glances. You are either brave or stupid, the leader said. People keep saying that, Una replied. I am starting to think it might be both. She walked between them before they could decide what to do, and none of them tried to stop her. Perhaps too surprised by her complete lack of fear to react in time. In her quarters, Una checked her supplies one more time and then lay down to sleep. Tomorrow would be the most important day of her life. Tomorrow, she would show the galaxy what a human could. As dawn began to lighten the artificial sky outside her window, she rose and dressed and made her way toward the arena where hundreds of trainees had already gathered to watch what they were certain would be a slaughter. The only question was whose. The shuttle doors opened with a hiss and Una Park stepped onto station. Car 7 for the first time in her life. She was small by any standard, standing at 5 feet 4 inches with a lean frame that held more strength than anyone would guess by looking at her. And as she walked through the docking bay, she could feel every single eye turning toward her with curiosity and contempt. The Galactic Martial Academy was not a place for humans. It was a place for predators, for apex species from across the galaxy who sent their young to become warriors. And in the 300 years since its founding, not a single human had ever been admitted through its doors until now. Una kept her expression neutral as she followed the guidance lights toward the main complex. Her small bag slung over one shoulder and her steps quiet against the metal floor. And she did not react when a group of trainees twice her size stopped their conversation to stare at her with open disbelief. "Is that a human?" One of them whispered loud enough for her to hear. "It must be lost." Another replied with a harsh laugh. Una walked past them without a word. The main complex rose before her like a monument to violence, its walls decorated with the symbols of 100 predator species, and its halls echoing with the sounds of combat training from somewhere deep within. And when Una entered through the massive doors, she found herself in an orientation hall filled with the most dangerous young beings in the galaxy. There were Korthians with their 4 arms and razor-sharp teeth, Morvathi with their sleek aquatic bodies and webbed claws, Valkyrie whose poisonous spines could kill with a single scratch, and towering above them all were the Drakvari with their armored scales and eyes that burned like molten gold. Una found an empty spot near the back of the hall and waited. The orientation speech was delivered by a scarred Korthian instructor named Morath, whose voice carried the weight of decades spent turning young predators into killers. And he spoke of honor and strength and the glory of combat while Una listened and memorized every word. When the speech ended, the trainees were directed toward the dining hall for their first meal. And it was there that Una encountered Vreka. Thornscale for the first time. Vreka was impossible to miss. She stood 8 feet tall with scales, the color of dried blood, and claws that dripped with venom that sizzled when it touched the floor. And she moved through the dining hall like she owned it, because in many ways she did, having been the top-ranked trainee for 3 consecutive cycles. Una collected her meal from the dispensary and turned to find a seat when a massive clawed hand slammed down on her tray and sent it clattering to the ground. Food splattered across the floor and across Una's boots, and the hall fell silent as every trainee turned to watch. Vreka loomed over her with a smile that showed rows of serrated teeth. "You are in the wrong place, little creature," Vreka said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "This academy is for warriors, not for soft pink things that break when you squeeze them too hard." Una looked down at her ruined meal and then back up at Vreka. Said nothing. "What is wrong?" Vreka continued, leaning closer until her hot breath washed over Una's face. "Are you too scared to speak? Too weak to defend yourself? This is what humans send to our academy." The other trainees laughed, and the sound filled the hall like the roar of hungry beasts. Una bent down and began picking up what remained of her food, placing the salvageable pieces back on her tray with calm and methodical movements. And when she stood back up, she simply walked around Vreka toward an empty table. The laughter grew louder. "Look at it!" someone shouted. "It does not even fight back." Vreka watched Una walk away with narrowed eyes, and there was something almost like disappointment in her expression, as if she had expected more and received nothing. The rest of the meal passed without incident, and Una ate what remained of her food in silence while the other trainees whispered and pointed and placed bets on how long The human would last before she either quit or died. After the meal, Instructor Morath pulled Yuna aside and looked her over with his 4 eyes. I do not know how you got admitted here, he said in a low voice, but I am assigning you to the lowest training cohort until you prove you belong somewhere else. And I suggest you keep your head down and try not to get killed in the first week. Understood, Yuna replied. Morath studied her for a moment longer, perhaps looking for fear or resentment. But he found neither. Dismissed, he said. Yuna made her way toward the trainee quarters as the station's artificial lights began to dim to simulate evening. And she was halfway down a long corridor when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Stop, Rekka commanded, and Yuna stopped. The Drakvari circled around to face her. And this time there was no audience, no one to perform for. Just the 2 of them alone in the corridor, with the hum of the station filling the silence. I watched you today, Rekka said. You did not cry. You did not beg. You did not run away like most prey does when they see me coming. And I cannot decide if that makes you brave or simply too stupid to understand the danger you are in. Yuna remained silent. Everyone here thinks you are a joke, Rekka continued, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. They think you will wash out within a cycle, that your species does not have what it takes to compete with true predators. And honestly, I thought the same thing until I saw the way you looked at me in the dining hall. She leaned closer, her golden eyes boring into Yuna's dark ones. There was no fear in those eyes, Rekka whispered. And I want to know why. Maybe there is nothing to fear, Yuna said quietly. Rekka laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. Nothing to fear? I could tear you apart with one hand, little human. I could crush your bones to powder and use your skull as a drinking vessel. And you say there is nothing to fear? You could try, Yuna agreed. The words hung in the air between them. Rekka's eyes widened slightly, and then her lips curled back in a smile that was all teeth and malice. Try me, human, she snarled. I dare you to face me in the arena and show everyone what your pathetic species is really made of. Yuna looked up at the towering predator and felt something shift inside her. Something that had been waiting for this moment, ever since she first applied to the academy, against all advice and all odds. When and where? She escaped. Rekka blinked, clearly not expecting acceptance. 3 days from now, she said after a moment. The training arena, 1 hour after dawn. And I promise you, human, you will regret those words for the rest of your very short life. I will be there, Yuna said. She walked past Rekka and continued toward the trainee quarters without looking back. And behind her she could hear the Drakvari standing in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened in her small quarters. Yuna sat on the edge of her bunk and finally allowed herself a small smile. This was exactly what she had come here for, not to hide, not to survive, but to prove something that no human had ever proven before, that they belonged among the predators, that they were not prey, and in 3 days, the entire galaxy would begin to understand.